The sound of my mother-in-law's hand against my cheek was louder than the Christmas music playing behind her, and for a full second, nobody in that living room moved, not even the dog. 2 hours later, she would be standing in my driveway in her slippers, begging me to reconsider. But at that exact moment, all I could hear was the ringing in my ear and the clink of a wine glass someone had set down too fast. I'm 34 years old. I've spent 11 years building a small architectural design firm from a spare bedroom into a studio with 4 employees and a waiting list of clients who found us through word of mouth alone. I mention this only because it matters later, because the woman who slapped me that night had spent those same 11 years telling anyone who'd listen that I was just drawing pictures for a living, and that her son was the real breadwinner in our marriage, even though my income had covered our mortgage for the last 4 years running. It was December 24th, snowing lightly. The kind of soft snow that doesn't stick but makes everything look like it should. I'd driven 2 hours that afternoon with a car full of gifts, a tray of the cranberry bars my husband's family always requested, and a card for his mother that my daughter had covered in glitter at the kitchen table the night before, her tongue between her teeth in concentration. I remember thinking, as I pulled into the driveway and saw the wreath crooked on the door, that this year would be different. I'd told myself that every year for 6 years. It hadn't started as slaps or shouting. It had started small, the way these things always do. A request to just help out with hosting Thanksgiving because her knees were bothering her. A loan for a car repair that was never mentioned again, let alone repaid. My husband, David, would wave it off. That's just how she is, he'd say, refilling his coffee, not quite meeting my eyes. Then it became watching our daughter 3 days a week to save on daycare, which somehow turned into unsolicited opinions about how I fed her, dressed her, and disciplined her. Then it became comments at every family dinner about my job not being a real profession, delivered with a smile, so no one else at the table would call it what it was. I used to tell myself I was choosing peace, that swallowing these things was a kind of strength. I know now that peace and silence aren't always the same thing, and I'd been mistaking one for the other for a long time. That Christmas Eve dinner had gone fine, better than fine, actually. My daughter had performed a little dance for everyone. David's father had laughed until he coughed, and I'd allowed myself to relax with a glass of wine I didn't finish. It was afterward, during gifts, that things shifted. My mother-in-law, whose name is Carol, opened the envelope I'd handed her. A gift card to her favorite garden store. The same thing I'd given her for 3 years, because she always said she loved it. And her face changed in a way I'd learned to recognize as trouble. This again, she said, not quite under her breath, loud enough for the room. You couldn't even think of something with a little effort this year. I said it was something she'd told me she wanted. I kept my voice even. You always do the bare minimum, she said, standing now. Just like with everything. This family, this house. My son. You just do the bare minimum and expect everyone to be grateful. I didn't answer that one. I've learned that silence, when it's steady and doesn't flinch, says more than any comeback could. But Carol wasn't finished. She brought up money. The loan David had quietly forgiven years ago, without telling me the full amount, which I only found out about that night. In front of everyone, because she threw it at me like a weapon. She brought up the daycare years, the holidays, said I'd stolen her son and made him weak. And when I still didn't raise my voice, when I simply set my wine glass down and said, I think it's time we head home. Something in her cracked. She slapped me. The room went silent the way rooms do in movies. Except this wasn't a movie, and my daughter was standing 3 feet away, holding a wrapped present she never got to open. David's father said her name, sharp, shocked. David himself just stood there, mouth open, saying nothing. And in that nothing, I heard everything I needed to know about where this had all been heading. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I picked up my daughter's coat, helped her into it, and said, calmly, "We're leaving now." Carol was already backpedaling, saying she didn't mean it, that I'd provoked her, that I always knew how to push her buttons. I said nothing. I walked out into the snow, buckled my daughter into her car seat, and drove away with my hands steady on the wheel, though I couldn't tell you, even now, how they stayed that way. It was in the car, at a red light 2 towns over, that David finally spoke. "She's just stressed," he said. "You know how she gets around the holidays." I looked at him for a long moment. "She hit me, David. In front of our daughter." I know. It's not okay, but we can't just cut her off. She's my mother." I didn't answer. I let the silence sit there between us the rest of the drive, because I needed him to feel the size of it, the way I was feeling it. It was 2 days later, while going through some old files for taxes, that I found the piece of proof that changed everything. Not about the slap itself, but about what had led to it. Buried in an email thread David had accidentally left open on our shared laptop was a conversation between him and his mother from October, 2 months before Christmas. Carol had written that she was tired of being treated like an afterthought, and that she thought David should put his foot down before that woman thinks she runs everything. David had replied that he agreed, that he'd talked to her about pulling back the money to Mom, meaning me, meaning my income, meaning the very thing keeping our household afloat. They'd been discussing, for months, ways to make me feel small enough that I'd stop having a say in decisions about money, about our daughter, about weekends and holidays and where we spent them. The slap wasn't an isolated eruption. It was the release valve on a pressure they'd been building together, quietly, for weeks. I called my sister, Mara, that night. My voice flat in a way she said unsettled her more than crying would have. Mara had never liked Carol, had said as much at my wedding, when she thought no one else could hear. "You've been shrinking yourself for 6 years to keep that family comfortable," she said. "You know that, right? You built a company. You run a household, and you're apologizing for a gift card." She didn't tell me what to do. She just reflected back to me, plainly, what I'd stopped being able to see for myself. That I had been performing smallness. So long I'd forgotten it was a performance. I didn't scream at David. I didn't confront Carol with the printed emails, though I kept them. Instead, 3 days after Christmas, I sat David down at our kitchen table and told him, calmly, what the new terms of our life would be. I would no longer host or attend family events where Carol was present unless she formally apologized in front of the same people who'd witnessed the slap. I would no longer be the one covering the gaps her spending left. The emergency loans, the last-minute babysitting rescues, the smoothing over of her moods for the comfort of everyone else. And if he couldn't stand behind those terms, I told him I needed him to understand that I would still walk away from the marriage with our daughter, and my dignity fully intact, because I finally understood I didn't need his family's approval to be a good mother, a good wife, or a good person. He didn't argue. I think some part of him had been waiting for someone to draw the line he couldn't draw himself. What followed wasn't a dramatic unraveling. I want to be honest about that, because I'm not interested in pretending I orchestrated some grand collapse. It was quieter, and, in its own way, more telling. Without my quiet financial cushioning, Carol's spending caught up with her within a few months. The emergency car loan I used to smooth over became a real, unresolved debt she had to face on her own. Without free babysitting, she lost the built-in excuse to insert herself into our daily lives. And with that distance came a kind of social shrinkage. The friends and family members, who'd only ever heard her side of things, started hearing mine too, and slowly, quietly, invitations to things stopped including her by default. David's father, of all people, was the one who eventually apologized to me directly, told me he'd watched his wife treat me poorly for years, and said nothing, and that he was sorry for his silence. I told him I understood. I meant it. David and I are still married. It looks different now. He calls his mother once a week instead of driving over to fix her problems himself. Holidays are smaller, calmer, and entirely ours to choose. Carol did eventually apologize. Not in a grand gesture, not in front of the family, but in a short, stiff phone call almost a year later. One that felt more like an acknowledgement of consequences than genuine remorse. I accepted it politely and kept the same boundaries in place anyway, because an apology doesn't undo a pattern. It just opens the door to see whether the pattern changes. As for me, I started taking Sunday mornings back for myself. Something so small it embarrasses me to say it mattered. But it did. I go to a pottery studio near my office now, hands in the clay, no one's voice in my head telling me I'm doing it wrong. My daughter still has that glitter-covered Christmas card. Actually, I kept it in a drawer, a strange little artifact from the night everything changed. My business grew that year, too. In a way I don't think was a coincidence. It's remarkable how much clearer your work gets when you're no longer spending half your energy managing someone else's moods. I think about that slap sometimes, not with anger anymore, but almost with gratitude, which surprised me the first time I noticed it. It was the loudest, clearest thing anyone had ever said to me about how little my peace had been worth to the people I kept protecting. It's strange how sometimes it takes one moment of undeniable disrespect to finally see 6 years of quiet ones. If there's one thing I'd want someone else to take from this, it's that the people who love you the least often demand the most silence from you. And the moment you stop giving it to them is the moment you finally start living for yourself. If this story stayed with you, you probably know exactly which silence in your own life needs breaking.